Balangiga was no ordinary village. Situated between green mountains and a river that glowed under the sun, it was known for its fireflies. To outsiders, these tiny lights were just insects, but to the people of Balangiga, they were ancestral spirits, glowing reminders of protection and guidance. Each year, during the Night of the Lights, the villagers celebrated their bond with these luminous beings. Songs filled the air, drums echoed through the valley, and the fireflies twisted glowing patterns in the dark sky. It was during such a festival that 12-year-old Amani and her 15-year-old brother Kofi and their father Baba Baraka, the village healer, sang a song about unity. Amani loved the fireflies most. They seemed to respond to her voice, swirling around her as if whispering secrets. But this year's celebration was cut short. With gunfire and thunderous hoofbeats shattered the rhythm of drums, and men in military uniforms stormed the village square. The general stood tall, his shadow swallowing the light of the bonfire. His eyes were cold as he surveyed the villagers with disdain. "This land is no longer yours," he declared. "The Americans claim this territory, and I will ensure it is secured for their empire. You will work for us or perish." His voice carried bitterness and ambition, but there was something else too, a desperation to prove himself in the eyes of his superiors. He needed to deliver results, and Balangiga was to be his trophy. His soldiers, their faces hard with obedience and fear, moved to destroy the firefly forest, chopping the trees to use as barricades. Soldiers began hacking at the sacred trees that formed the firefly forest. The fireflies rushed about wildly, their light dimming as if in pain. Baba Baraka stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the murmurs of fear. "This is sacred tree. You cannot take what belongs to our ancestors." The general smiled, unimpressed. "Your ancestors won't protect you when I'm done here. This ground is sacred. If you destroy it, the spirits will not rest." Baba Baraka said me in fear. The general sneered but paused, his gaze sharpening as he studied Baba Baraka. "Spirits, you say? Tell me, healer, do these spirits fight? Can they hold rifles or build forts? Because that is what I need. Not whispers and light." The general's motives were not purely territorial. His orders from the American government demanded swift subjugation of the Philippines, particularly regions like Balangiga that were fiercely independent. However, Greaves harbored a personal revenge. Years earlier, during another campaign, he had faced unexpected resistance from native forces who wielded guerrilla tactics and spiritual symbols that unsettled his men, viewing their traditions as weapons just as dangerous as swords. "I've seen what men like you do," the general said, his voice low. "Your so-called spirits inspire rebellion. But I'll crush that spark here and now." With a sharp nod, his soldiers seized Baba Baraka. The villagers erupted in protests. He fought with intense determination, swinging his fists and kicking wildly at the soldiers while shouting at the top of his lungs, "Run! Protect the fireflies!" But the general struck him with the butt of his rifle, dropping him to his knees. "Bring him," he ordered. Baba Baraka was dragged away, blood streaming his temple, while the villagers were forced into silence under the threat of the soldiers' guns. Turning to Amani and Kofi, Baba Baraka shouted, "Take your mother and go into the jungle. The fireflies will guide you." Tears streaking her face, Amani watched as her father disappeared into the shadows, a lone figure standing between their home and destruction. The jungle was dense and alive, full with sounds that seemed to echo their fear. The fireflies assembled around Amani, their glow shielding her family from the soldiers. Her mother, struggling with grief, Kofi's face was hard with anger. "We can't just run. We should fight." Gripping her father's walking stick, Amani whispered. Baba said to trust the fireflies. She noticed the insects flickering in patterns as if pointing a path. "They're trying to lead us somewhere." Hours passed, and they found a hidden cave near the river. Exhausted, they crowded together as Amani whispered a lullaby. The fireflies danced in the cave's darkness, their glow providing comfort. Yet Kofi's anger simmered. "Songs won't save us, Amani. I'll find a way to fight back." The next morning, Kofi slipped away while Amani and her mother slept. His plan was to ambush a small group of soldiers and steal their weapons. However, the soldiers were prepared. Kofi was captured and dragged to the general's camp. The general stood before Kofi, a sneer playing on his lips. "You're brave for a boy," he said, his voice mocking. "But bravery without power is foolishness." He ordered his men to tie Kofi to a tree at the center of the camp, visible to all. Each time the boy refused to answer their questions, a soldier would strike him. The general observed this with detachment. Let them see what happens to those who resist. The other captured villagers watched in horror as Kofi endured the punishment. Some wept silently, while others whispered prayers to the ancestors, begging for intervention. In another part of the camp, Baba Baraka was bound tightly, his wrists raw from the ropes. The soldiers underestimated his resolve. Pretending to be weakened by his injuries, he bided his time, observing their routines and the location of their weapons. When a young soldier approached to deliver a ration of food, Baba Baraka seized the moment. He faked collapse, then rushed forward, knocking the soldier unconscious and slipping away into the forest. He moved stealthily, guided by the fireflies that flitted around him like silent guard. Though his body ached, he pushed on, determined to find his children and rescue the villagers. Meanwhile, Amani awoke to the absence of her brother. Panic set in, but the fireflies appeared, their lights vibrating rapidly. "They're trying to tell us something," she said. Following their lead, Amani and her mother stumbled upon a clearing where they could see the general's camp below. Kofi was tied to a tree, his defiance still burning in his eyes despite his fear. Amani closed her eyes, praying to the spirits of the fireflies for guidance. Suddenly, the insects swirled around her, forming intricate patterns in the air. She understood their message. The fireflies could help, but she would have to be brave. As night fell, Amani approached the camp, using the fireflies to stay hidden in the shadows. The soldiers were unnerved by the glowing swarm, their superstitions bubbling to the surface. "It's a bad omen," one whispered. Amani began humming the village song, the melody carrying through the camp. The fireflies responded, their lights growing brighter. The soldiers panicked, believing they were under attack by spirits. Using the confusion, Amani reached Kofi and untied him. "I told you, trust the fireflies," she said with a smile. Together, they snuck back to their mother, but the general, furious, ordered his men to torch the jungle. Flames licked the trees, and animals fled in terror. Amani's heart raced. "The fireflies! They'll be destroyed," she cried. She ran toward the blaze despite her mother's protests, determined to save their ancestral protectors. Kofi followed, and together, they used wet leaves and soil to quench small flames. But the fire grew, and it seemed all hope was lost until the fireflies began gathering in massive numbers. They twisted around the soldiers, confusing them. The general stumbled, "They're just bugs. Destroy them." He shouted orders, but his men, disoriented and terrified, refused to follow. The fireflies swarmed him, their light so intense they had become a living storm. The general dropped his rifle. "Retreat," he bellowed, stumbling into the darkness. His forces scattered, their discipline shattered by the unity of the villagers and the mystical power of the fireflies. Their light blinding the soldiers, leading them away from the heart of the jungle. A sudden rainstorm, possibly a blessing from the ancestors, extinguished the flames and saved the sacred forest. The villagers returned to find the firefly forest intact, thanks to Amani's bravery and the spirit's intervention. Baba Baraka, injured but alive, embraced his children. "You've honored our ancestors," he said, pride shining in his eyes. The general and his forces had fled, defeated not by weapons, but by the unity of the villagers and the mystical power of their beliefs. That night, the village held a new festival of fireflies, this one celebrating survival and resilience. Amani, standing among the glowing lights, whispered, "Thank you," to the fireflies and to the spirits of their ancestors. As the fireflies danced, she turned to the camera and spoke directly to the audience. "What would you do to protect what you love?" This story reminds us that even the smallest lights can drive away the darkness. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.